We're talking today with Mr. Daniel Horon. And what town do you live in now?
Sparta.
Sparta, Michigan, right? And the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, can you begin by telling us a little bit about your own background? For instance, where and when were you born?
I was born in Chicago in
What year?
1939,
Okay.
right in the cold day of February.
All right.
I got to run around Chicago a little bit, and our biggest adventure was going out in the prairie, which was a vacant lot where some strange weeds grew, an occasional flower, an occasional bug, but
Right.
that was it.
What part of Chicago were you living in then?
The south side, near the stockyards.
Okay.
And my dad would take me to the stockyard to see the cattle.
Now, did you grow up there or did you move somewhere else?
Well, at the age of 6, my dad sprung us from there and brought us to Michigan, down near Bridgman,
Okay.
south of St. Joe and Benton Harbor.
And did he have a job there?
Yeah, he had a job near there, and he worked as a machinist, and then he worked in a super laundry company, setting up washing machines, big washers and ironers, 8-roll ironers, where they could take a bed sheet and run it through there.
Okay. And then where did you go to high school?
Went to high school at Bridgman High School.
Okay. And then what year did you graduate?
Graduated in 57.
Okay.
In 56, about a year before that, I joined the Navy Reserve and went to meetings in Benton Harbor at the armory there. And I always had my Blue Jackets manual as a kid to read through and see Navy procedures and all that. But had a few uncles in the Navy way back, World War II.
Okay. So you just joined the reserves just because you thought it was interesting, or did you figure you'd go into the Navy, or what was the plan?
Well, I figured I'd go in because I always wanted to. But at the same time, I got a good college deal, and I messed that all up. My folks got mad at me for that, for wanting to be in the service. But
Now, when you were growing up, did you do any sailing or boating? Did you get out on Lake Michigan or things like that?
oh yeah, I had friends, and we'd take speedboats out on Lake Michigan, and we did a lot of wood crafts and hiking and
Mm-hmm.
looking for arrowheads and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. So you're kind of in pretty good shape, and you'd been on the water before and that kind of thing, so
Yeah.
that should help at that next stage. All right. Now, you join the Naval Reserves, and is there an expectation that you go on active duty, or you just...
Oh yeah, 2 years active.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when did you start that?
Well, like in November of 57, I graduated in the summer, and
Mm-hmm.
around November of 57, my mom took me to Chicago with some friends with another guy that was going, and we got on our first airplane and flew to Washington, D.C. And we got in just at sunset, and it was just beautiful, the sunset over the Potomac and
Mhm.
Washington Monument and stuff.
So where did you do your training then?
Well, the training was at Great Lakes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that. What did they have you do there?
Well, they got a little rough with you. They took you in a swimming pool, and they made you wash your feet, make sure you didn't have any fungus on your feet or anything, and walk through there, and they march you up on a platform, and it's about 15 feet above the water. Matter of fact, you're looking out the windows of a gymnasium when you're up there, and they have you step off
Mm-hmm.
and go down in the pool, and some guys had never been in water before, so this was the experience to go march up this thing. It's one by one, so they'd just throw them off, and they'd come up just screaming and hollering, and they had a padded long pole that they would have them grab onto. But this one guy climbed a pole. He wouldn't let go of it. He just climbed right up it, so they let go of it, and the pole went to the bottom. He climbed up it like a monkey. When he hit the top, he fell in. Then he was really terrorized.
Did he stay in, or did he wash out?
I don't know. We had a lot of experiences in there. We had one mean officer come in one night, and he goes upstairs. The officer of the day, OOD, he would inspect the barracks at night, make sure it's safe. And he ran upstairs, and he went upstairs, and pretty soon the guys come down in their skivvies, which is their white underwear, and they're carrying this garbage can out, and they're dumping it and taking it back up. So he's figured, oh boy. He comes in our place, and he's got a nightstick, and he gets a garbage can, and you know the corrugations in a garbage can. It sounds like a machine gun going off. And then he kicks the can to full length, and then he found a bucket of clothes soaking in the washroom there, in the laundry room. He sloshed that the whole length of the deck. He said, I want it cleaned up in 10 minutes, he said. He gave us 10 minutes. So here we had to get up, get mops and buckets and dry out the floor and beat up the guy who left his clothes in there. You know, we took a time and straighten the whole place up. Then he comes back in. It's all quiet. And he said, that's more like it. And from the far corner comes a voice, good night, Daddy. Ooh. It was total silence, but you could hear his jaw creak into a smile, kind of a grin maybe, and he walked out. But I thought we were all going to be out there marching all night, getting wise to him, you know. But he probably hadn't been called Daddy in a long time by these guys. So anyhow, that was one of the fun times we had.
Right.
Then they put us in a gas chamber. They put us in a room with glass windows and gave us masks. They told us to fit them good. So I did. I fit mine pretty well. But some guys just clowning around, you know. And they put us in a room and lined us up so they could watch us. And everyone had to take their mask off. So they got a good whiff of that. And they stayed in there until the last guy took his mask off, which was really bad. And you came out and you couldn't see. You couldn't, I mean, tear gas was really bad stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, that was some of the fun we had.
Okay. Did they do a lot of physical training and conditioning in basic or school?
Oh yeah, a lot of push-ups and marching and carrying these antique rifles that weighed about 16 pounds probably, and we did a lot of that kind of stuff.
And you had to learn kind of just drill and discipline and follow orders and that
Oh
sort
yeah,
of
we
thing.
also had a fire drill where they put us in a building and set it on fire. They had a narrow walkway, and you in a concrete building had a narrow hallway through it and had some windows on the outside and that were open, but inside were oil tanks. They'd open a steel door and throw a torch in there, and you had to go through there with a fire hose and put that out. So, and you had one group had a covering hose to cover you so you'd be safe and wouldn't burn to a crisp walking in there. And then the other guys had the powerful nozzle, but it took at least 2 or 3 men to hold the nozzle down because it'd carry you right up in the air. So you didn't want anybody to abandon anybody at any time. And they also had an outdoor tank they set on fire, and we had to have covering spray and go put that out because there's a lot of fires on ships
Right.
and stuff.
Okay. So certain kind of practical training. I guess I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of the descriptions of naval basic that I've heard from other people from other periods, and you're the first one to come up with that. So it may have been a byproduct of World War II and some of those experiences on those ships or something,
Yeah.
but pretty good practical training on some level there. All right. And did you have sort of classroom work of any kind while you were in basic, or was it just all this kind of thing?
I kept a notebook of some of the classroom work. They showed us how to fire a 5-inch .38. You know, had a demonstrator there where now a 5-inch .38 is a deck artillery, and it has a 60-pound projectile, and you drop that in there, and there's a gate comes down behind it, and then there's 2 bags of powder that you stuff in there, and then at the signal it rams it all in and locks the breech and fires it, and that shell comes up and it's already armed for the distance you want it to go off at. So, but we would practice load those things, and oh man, you know, 66-pound shell, all brass. Pick that baby up, throw her in there, and we were just little kids, you know. I was like a 129-pound weakling in a Charles Atlas ad where they kick sand in my face, you know. But I come out about 25 pounds heavier.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, about how long did the basic training last?
Oh, it was just a couple weeks, but it was regular boot camp. You had physicals, you had everything, and you had your dog tags made up and all that good stuff.
Okay. And then you flew out to Washington, and where did you go from there?
Washington, D.C., I was put right into mess cooking and for the officers' mess.
Okay.
And they always had little blocks of ice cream, and we got to keep those if we could get all of them. And it was Washington, D.C. It was an old barracks. There's a lot of cockroaches around, and you'd be sitting there, and a pair of cockroaches would run out. One guy said, "I got the top one for $2." So if he ran in, if he hit out first or made the longest run, you know, we'd even bet on him. While cooking for the officers on Thanksgiving, a cockroach walked across the wall behind me, and I was wiping the counter, slapped him with a rag and put it right back. They all looked around, but they didn't know who done it. But anyhow, the cockroaches were crawl out of a straw box on the officer's table while you're there, so you just smash them with something.
Now, was this just a temporary duty where they were figuring out what else to do with you, or was this?
Yeah, it was temporary duty. You got mess cooks, stay in the barracks, and weekends I'd go down and see the Capitol. I'd put 50 cents in my pocket, so I had bus fare home, and took my camera, and I bought my first 35 millimeter down there for about $20, an old used one, and ran a lot of film through that, and got up in the Washington Monument, took pictures out of there, and really had a good time in Washington. Went to the Smithsonian and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, at a certain point, do they move you on for more specialized training someplace, or just send you off to a base, or what happens next?
Well, the next thing they did was they put me on a train and on an overnight sleeper to Brooklyn, New York. Got to Brooklyn, New York. They had us paint asbestos in a whole boiler room for a few days. Very good for the lungs. But,
Mm-hmm.
and then they sent us to Newfoundland. I spent some winter time in New York City, and I got to see how cold it is in those concrete canyons in the wintertime. And they one day they said, "We're going aboard ship." So they took us on a dock, and we stood there as it snowed. And when we got on the ship, there was some dry lines there where hadn't been any snow able to fall. And we were there that long with our sea bags, and we got aboard, and they put us in bunks, and away we went in the North Atlantic in February.
Okay. Now, when they told you the place you were going, what did that sound like to you? Where did you think you were going to go?
I saw it on my orders. It said Argentia, and I thought it meant Argentina. And I said, "What's this NFLD on the back?" And they said, "Newfoundland." They said, "You're from Michigan. You can probably take the cold." So everybody waited in Washington, D.C. to got their orders. Some
Mm-hmm.
guys got to go to Rota, Spain, and some guys got to go to secret places where they would buy them civilian clothes to match where they were, or you know, they would act like businessmen, but they were in the service. And anyhow,
Mm-hmm.
they sent me to Newfoundland. So I went in the library and looked it up on the charts, and I said, "Oh boy." Well, we were 7 days going north.
Okay. What was that trip like?
Well, it was nice in the North Atlantic in the wintertime, of course. The wind, you go out on board deck, and your pants would hang way back from your leg. You could see the outline of your legs, and the pants would just be fluttering in the breeze, and you could barely be out there very long. And but if you got seasick, you'd have to go up on deck. And I got seasick, and I wasn't really seasick until they gave me a job of mopping the head, which is the
Mm-hmm.
front toilet area, and they had a trough along the wall for the men to use, and the water was going up and down in there, and the floor was black and white, and you're watching a mop, and the toilets are, you know, as the ship went up and down. I mean, it was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I got seasick, and a friend of mine gave me some Dramamine and said, "Go on deck here." Gave me some pills, and then he gave me some Dramamine, and I found out why he wanted me to go on deck, feed the fish a little bit, I guess. But
Right.
anyhow, so we got to Newfoundland, and here comes Army tugboats, Army Corps of Engineer, and bring us into the harbor. And all we see is a couple little snow-covered hills, and we think, oh boy, this is great, you know. Anyhow, it was really antique barracks, old barracks, and they said, well, I was going to work in the post office. So I went to work in the post office, and at midnight they'd wake you up to go unload a plane. Well, the plane just come in, and all that mail was in the belly, and it was frozen together, so you had to chip it out and hand it down to the back of a truck and go in there.
Now, what unit were you assigned to there? Who was based up there?
Well, it was the DEW line, the Distant Early Warning Line, and it was a series of aircraft with radar on them that would fly out to the Azores and make a 12-hour run. And below them were radar picket ships, and some of those ships saw waves as high as 100 feet. And they come back covered with ice and all kinds of, they had to keep the radar and all that clean, so they'd have to go out there and chip ice, even if it was 2 feet thick. Mm-hmm. And so we would plot the contacts on great big map boards and keep track of all that. And then I got in the Air Intelligence Office by going to school for it in Norfolk for a couple weeks, 4 weeks. And then on the way back, I had to fly out of Pax River, Maryland, Patuxent River, Maryland. And there was a Super Connie going up to Newfoundland in 3 hours.
What's a Super Connie?
Super Radar Connie. It's a Constellation, Lockheed Constellation. Mm-hmm. It's got the big belly with the radar gear and then the top hat radar. So that was leaving in 3 hours. So I hadn't been in the States a while, so I walked around a little bit. But pretty soon, I thought, there's nothing to do. I might as well go back to Newfoundland. So I went in and asked them if they had an earlier flight. And here I was, just a seaman, no stripes or nothing, and said, you got any early flights to Newfoundland? The guy said, well, we got another one leaving in 10 minutes. So I got on that one, flew up there, and landed, and they said, hey, you've been in the States on Liberty, you're going on fire watch. So I went on fire watch, and I walked up and down the hallway, and the hallway end was near the runway, and I heard an aircraft come in and make a big roaring noise and go around again, and that crashed. And that was the one I was supposed to be on. Mm-hmm. And they lost 13 men, or they saved 11 men and lost 13. But I knew one of the guys was on there. He was Mr. Foster, and he was a Red Cross representative, and he lost his life on that. So there we lost about 13 men, and another one went down, another 12 guys. They never found that radar plane. And another smaller plane took off, and something was wrong with the tail, and it just went right out in the water. We were on a little bit of an island, triangular-shaped runway. And, you went there's 2 mountains. You went this way, you better bring it up because there's a ridge of mountains, and you go the other way, and I don't know what all's there, but it was not a nice place to drop in and out of.
Right, because the base is sort of at the head of a fairly narrow bay that comes up out of the ocean away, so you've got the hills and the mountains right there around you.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of room to spare for the aircraft. Okay. Now, were there any of the crashes actually on the base or on the runway that you have to go out and deal with, or were they all somewhere
else?
Well,
this crash was about 1,200 feet off the runway in the water. And we went out on a hike out there later, and I found a pattern of rocks, almost like a cross, and I took a picture of it. It was where that plane went down, and backlighted by the sun on the glistening beach pebble. It was a pretty nice shot. And but it was cold. I mean, we had fall weather jackets that had fleece an inch thick in them, and the snow would blow so hard. It was always windy up there, and the wind would average 40 knots about 20 to 30% of the time in the winter. So the wind could actually blow you down if you come around the corner of a building, but the snow would hit your eyes and you almost needed safety glasses. I didn't wear glasses at the time, so I got off of a bus patrol one time and had to stay where the bus ended up. And I had to walk across the street to a barracks and I couldn't see where I was going and the snow hit my eyes and was cutting them. So I kind of figured out where I was and I went across the street and I missed the barracks door. And right then you stop and think, which way is the wind blowing? And go back up against it. The wind blew me down, so I had to, and I found the doorway and they put me up for the night there. But we lost guys outside the barracks that couldn't.
So they would be outside and they couldn't see and they just freeze to death out there? Or?
Yeah. Especially guys get drunk or something and then pass out or couldn't make it, or they recommended 3 people at once go anywhere in the wintertime.
Now, what kinds of duties did you have once you got your more specialized training?
Well, the air intelligence training in Washington, D.C. was all about secret aircraft rockets and stuff like that, missiles. Anyhow, and we kept contact of the Russian wireless, actually wire recordings of the Russians, and we had to patch those up, and we had to. I became quite a graphic artist, making displays and shooting photography of aircraft contacts and ships and so on, and making a presentation. And one of our presentations was for the Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland, who came in, and all the officers, and I always set the projectors up and did.
So what is it you're showing them? Sort of where the Soviets were?
We're showing slideshows of aircraft and all that. And one time, the Russians cut the Atlantic cable with a fishing boat. The fishing boat has some wooden doors with steel edges that they put ropes on them and they pull the net apart, and then they get some fish in it and they bring it in, pull different ropes, and they bring them right up on the ship. And some of their trawlers had a ramp in the back that could bring them right up and chop them up. So the Russians cut the Atlantic cable somehow, by accident probably. But they said, oh, that's great, go out and take some pictures of it. So they put me in a front nose of P2V7, which was a plastic bubble nose. And I had 3 different cameras, all manual settings, all different. I borrowed 2 of them, so I'd never seen them before. They said, go take pictures. So they put a rubber suit on me because that would let you live 30 minutes with that rubber suit on, 30 minutes, otherwise 10 minutes.
So under the water?
In the water.
In the water.
The water was that cold.
Uh-huh.
Like 34 or 38.
So they were actually trying to have you go down to take pictures of the cut cables? Was that?
No, they wanted me to take pictures of the Russian trawler.
Okay.
So I came back with pictures of Russian trawlers. I have a couple of them. And one shows a reflection off the window like a hand over a ship. It's kind of interesting, but maybe it's the hand of God, I don't know. But anyhow, I photographed pictures of icebergs and ships out there.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting because the pilot says, there's a ship over to starboard, or to port. There's a ship to port. You want a shot of it? Sure. He takes that plane. He's flying over here, and the ship's over here. He takes the plane and just drops her in and cruises right by it. He side-slipped it in, went right over it. Well, I lost all my camera gear and stuff the first time he tried that, so I had to come back. And
So when you were taking pictures, did you have to stick yourself outside of the plane or drop?
No,
into
there
the
was
water?
a bubble nose all
Okay.
around it. I got one photograph just shows my feet on a little rack, and another photograph shows me outside the plane with a bubble nose, and that's where I was. They wouldn't let me be in there on takeoff. And as a matter of fact, that guy was so fussy, our pilot was so fussy, he tried out 2 aircraft before we took the 3rd one up. We're going out in the North Atlantic in the wintertime. We're not, playing games there. So
Okay. But did they at some point, because you mentioned you had the rubber suit and so forth, I mean, did they actually, was that just in case you fell in the water?
that was in case we had
Okay,
a ditch in the
okay.
water.
So they weren't hanging you out from the bottom of the plane and dragging
No,
you
no,
into
they
the
were-
water or something like that.
They thought of it, but they didn't.
All right. So then how did you lose the camera equipment? Did it just fall or break or something inside the plane? Because you said the first time you tried a particular
Well, the first time
maneuver-
I tried it, I had a couple of them around my neck,
Mhm.
and you're you're doing some roller coaster stuff here, and the cameras are flying all over,
Right.
and I didn't get the shot. It's too much activity, but next time I was ready for it. So I got 3 or 4 shots, and I was able to develop them in a cabin, so I brought those home, copies of them.
Mhm.
I brought them home, but we developed them in a brown beggar's cabin, which is a married enlisted man. He's got a brown bagger,
Mhm.
and we had a hard time keeping the water at the right temperature for color development. But anyhow, we did it, and so it was quite interesting. And then the life photographers came up, and I saw them. They went through our office. And those guys had it easy. They had 3 cameras the same with different lenses on it, and they had a camera bag with about 100 rolls of film, all open out of the boxes, just ready to, so they could get a shot somehow, even if the camera fell off,
Right. And so they, because the Life magazine actually sort of had pictures of some of the men who were involved, because at some point the Navy actually sends a destroyer out to go and board the Russian trawler,
Yep.
the Novorossiysk, and talk to them and so forth. And so there were reports of that in some of the magazines and things like that at the time. But and in the magazine's articles, the way they presented it was that when they got on the trawler, and there were plenty of fish there, they seemed to be fishing, and there was a commissar or somebody there, but that on the whole, it was possible that the cable cutting was an accident. It's just that they'd cut about 5 cables
At once.
in a very small space of time. Now, did you talk to any of the people who went out there and saw that ship, or did you hear things about what they reported when they got back?
Well, there was a secret report on it, but it's pretty much what you said. They couldn't figure out how they cut that many cables, but it seemed like they were trying to see what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And their fishing trawlers had top hat radar, which goes up and down, and you don't need that to find out where the fish are. I mean, that was for checking on our aircraft
Right.
and our patrol craft, and we were responsible for keeping track of every aircraft or ship crossing the ocean, and sometimes we found strange stuff going across at weird speeds across the barrier, and
Mm-hmm.
so all that was reported, and aboard the ship they found some seagulls that had been delegated to the dinner table, and they were hanging up along a string. I would say that was in the secret report, but that's probably not secret anymore.
Right. I'm not sure how good seagull is anyway, but
It's
now,
pretty good if all you had at fish for a couple of years.
right. Okay. Now, what kinds of things did you encounter? Were there a lot of trawlers in the area? Was that what the Russians used a lot? Or
Well, the Grand Banks is there, and I actually found a picture, it is among my pictures, of the ocean bottom. And it shows the mountain ranges down through the Atlantic, and Grand Banks is a very shallow spot, and he did a lot of fishing out there.
Mhm.
And
Now, were there Soviet submarines in the area, or Soviet aircraft, or other things
there
like
was
that?
everything out there. The P2V-7 I was in has a stinger tail, and that's where the Marine Airborne Detection is, magnetic airborne detection gear, MAD gear, for picking up a sub crossing the magnetic lines of force in the earth. And it was the guy from Newfoundland during the early war years. They made patrol boats, patrol aircraft to convoy the ships back and forth to England. And it was an Argentia pilot that said, sighted sub, sank same.
Mm-hmm.
He gave the old testimony, I saw that baby and it's gone, But that was an Argentia pilot.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Now, what was the atmosphere like on the base, in the sense that you're there kind of 50, 59, you're in the middle of the Cold War era? I mean, were you thinking that things might heat up or get more difficult, or did you figure they'd stay about at the level they were at?
well, it was dangerous times. I mean, everybody's playing with rockets and missiles, and a matter of fact, when we were up in that aircraft, the pilot saw something coming and he dodged it. Now, we don't know what it was, a flying saucer, a, a missile, or a streak on his windshield. But I mean, he actually violently maneuvered the plane just while we were on that run. But nobody had the capability of firing a missile much in the middle of the ocean at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyhow, we were people home were digging bomb shelters. The guy who started the Hungarian Revolution was executed by Russia in 1958, and he said, you know, I mean, it was dangerous times,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of talk of war, and there was a skirmish in Lebanon, and some small aircraft landed on our base, and they were so small they only had 3 steps on the ladder to get in them. I mean, just very tiny, and they were flying over to Lebanon for combat support.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost a few men in the little Lebanon skirmish at that time. So that looked like that was going to take off. Plus, the Russians had a man get sick on board a ship, and he had to pull into port for a appendix operation or something. And one of our officers went in civilian clothes and boarded the ship because they had little tours. And he came back, and his report said all visitors were photographed from a concealed location.
Mm-hmm.
So he was pretty sharp to see that. But there was a lot of spies and things going on. And I guess they did find some spies up in Newfoundland there.
Now, what kind of security procedures or things did they actually have in place at the base? Were there rules you had to follow or things like that? Or were you not important enough to be covered by that?
Well, I had a top secret clearance, but that
Mm-hmm.
was just for the base stuff.
Right.
And you just didn't talk too much about what you were doing. The radio men never talked about what they heard back and forth. And one of my good buddies was a radio man. He just died a couple of weeks ago out in Arizona. I was always going to go out and have another expedition with him, but we never made it. Oh, my old buddy Rick. But anyhow, we never talked chop, you know, that what we found, we kept quiet. What they found, what they heard. But
Okay. Now, what was daily life like up there? Because you mentioned people could live off base and that kind of thing. Was there a town there that you could go into? Were there sort of civilians around, or?
well, there was a town nearby, and it was called Placentia, and we would go there, and there was a little bar, Kelly's Bar, and you could drink some English ale, which had the name of Hague. So you'd drink some Hague ale, and it was not very strong. They were making a lot of money if you ever wanted to get drunk, you know. But anyhow, the guys would go there, and there would be fights between the natives and us, and between the Marines and the Marine Guards and the sailors, and you know, it just went. And it was kind of dark and dreary place. And in the summer, you're supposed to be in bed at 9 o'clock, and the sun would be up in the sky yet. You know, that wouldn't go down for a couple hours yet. And in the wintertime, you'd get up and go to work at 8 o'clock, and it'd be dark. And around noon, the sun would come up for an hour or two and go back. So by the time you got out at 4, it was dark again. And it was cold, miserable, rainy, blizzards. And we got 60 degrees a couple times while I was up there, once each year. And so I spent about 2 years up there.
Mm-hmm.
And one time I was walking back into the barracks from the bus dropped me off outside the barracks. There was some mounds of snow, and I walked over and I fell in a hole where a car had been parked. And I fell in up to my shoulders, and I yelled at the barracks that was right near it, and the guys came out and pulled me out. So it was pretty rough going out there.
When the weather was better, could you kind of get up in the hills and look around a little bit, or?
Yeah, there was a silver mine a few miles, about 5 miles away, and we'd make up our lunch and go hike around the bay and go out there. And on the way, we found a gun emplacement up there to protect the harbor, because they had all kinds of activity during World War II, protecting convoys and refueling them, and you know, keeping the subs out of the bay, because the bay was pretty deep. There's a big steel chain there, a big iron chain that links that big, you know, just that went across there for sub protection. But there was a gun mount up there, and it had about an 8-inch cannon up there, and there was a seat on each side and little hand wheels. So we got in there and we were playing around with that. We pointed it out across the bay, and I got to thinking, what if there's some guy on one of them ships out there, sees us screwing around up here, doesn't know this thing isn't armed. The guy said, well, there's no ammunition there. I said, look at behind you, and there in the hill was some steel doors, and that's where the shells were for it. So,
Right. Oh, it was all still up there. All right.
and then we found a silver mine with abandoned equipment, went down in it, and got a few rock samples.
And did you, while you were based up there, did you get a chance to go any place else or visit any place else, or did you just stay up in Virginia the whole time?
We got a chance to go to St. John's. That was the capital of Newfoundland. 80 miles by gravel road. And I mean gravel road. The gravel was from that big up, you know, and sharp. And we had this old beat up car, and the frame had separated between the 4 doors, so the whole side shook, and that was a good dust collector. It was like a vacuum cleaner going down the road, and a cloud of dust inside. And we got near the town, and I'll be doggone if Stone didn't go up and shoot the radiator hose off. So we stopped at a gas station, of which there was probably the only one for 100 miles, and the guy said, oh, I can fix that. So he gets a piece of hose, and he makes one.
Mm-hmm.
He split a hose with a knife, and he put it all back together and rewound it, and we had a piece of hose on there, and we took off again. But you had to be pretty constructive, pretty good at constructing something out of nothing up there to make cars keep running.
Now was St. John's any more comfortable a place than Virginia was?
Well, St. John's, we had a little room in a house, and the doors were about that wide. They were double doors, but they only used one of them, so not let much cold in. And all the houses up there are painted strange colors. I mean, it might be dark maroon with dark green trim, or one house we found was yellow and green checkers about that big. Somebody painted the whole house yellow and green checkers. And there was a pink house with red trim and a blue roof. And I think it was just to find them in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, we stayed in this place, and then we went down and we saw Quitty Vitty Lake. And they have very descriptive names of places like Whale Bay and Quitty Vitty Lake, and Carboneer is where the coal mines were, so they call it Carboneer. And they had really good ideas. There's a lot of English and Scotch up there, mm-hmm. red-haired Irish girls and stuff. So it was an interesting place.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that back in Placentia, some of the guys would get in fights in the bars with the locals and so forth. I mean, when people weren't drinking a whole lot, did you get along with the local population pretty well, or was there tension between them?
Yeah, I met a man named Jim Crow. He was a carpenter on the base for a while. He brought me a piece of fluorite, which is just beautiful. It's kind of a bluish green stone, and he brought me that, and we got to talking. And they have a song up there, rowing in me dory with a codfish in me hand, rowing in me dory, and you know, it's just kind of funny stuff. With a blonde upon a beach and a bottle of Newfie Screech, I wouldn't give a dom for Pennsylvania. It just, you know, it's anti-American, and yet it's kind of strange.
Right. Are there other particular events or things that happened up there that tend to come back to you, or when you think of being up there and living up in Newfoundland, other particular things that kind of stand out?
Well, you could buy a whole pot of tea for a nickel, but a cup of coffee was a quarter, you know. I mean, they didn't drink coffee, so it was kind of rare. And they would go fishing in these little sailing boats and had a dory behind them. And they would go out, and they had to have a foghorn to find their way back to the ship, because they'd go out in dories and hand-lined codfish and stuff. And one guy took a spoon out of the chow hall, a big tablespoon, and he cut the handle off, and he made a fishing lure out of it, and he caught a codfish. And the thing was that wide, you know. It was, so that's what a codfish looks like. And another guy went down in a diving suit and brought up a lobster, and its claws were that big. You could have got your wrist in there, I figured. But it was and they cooked it up for him in the chow hall. And one day I went through the chow hall with my metal tray, and I heard a rattling noise, and there was a lobster on my tray, hanging over both sides. Yeah. And I said, what do I do with this? And the guy hands me some tools, you know, wrapped in a napkin.
Right.
There's a
Claw cracker.
pliers,
Yep.
and pinchers and a couple of picks and stuff. And so that's how one of the guys from Maine showed me how to get it apart, and it was good, but
Oh, yeah.
scary.
All right. Now, did you get many sort of higher ranking types that were coming to visit you there? I mean, you mentioned you've got a lieutenant governor in Newfoundland once, but anybody else come through that got any particular attention?
Yeah, McCoyan, the Russian, his Swedish airliner developed trouble near Newfoundland, so he lands on our base, which is secret.
Mm-hmm.
And the officers took him to lunch, so he wouldn't get to talk to anybody hardly, and he just a stern-looking little guy. I got some pictures of him, and he just looked, you know, he's got his hat down, and the mean Russian look, you know.
Right. But he had been somebody who'd been in the Soviet government for a long time and was something of a survivor.
Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty harmless as they go, but it made quite a stir. That
Sure.
we had to save his life by letting him land there, you know. Anyhow, yeah, as a lieutenant governor of Newfoundland would come to shows, and I'd take slideshows of the buried cars and the stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the pictures I have is of men walking in the snow on a hill, and then the next picture shows where they're walking is 2 feet above the car roofs, and it shows the side of a car buried in there. So, I mean, you could, if you had a car up there, it was a challenge. And one of our bus runs went by the bachelor officers' quarters, which was the tallest building in Newfoundland. It was, I don't know how many stories, maybe 8 or 10 stories. It was for the officers, up built on a hill on the other side of town. And but when they graded the driveway, they didn't do it quite right. And this officer parked his car back there, and it thawed overnight and got water above the center of his hubcaps and under the frame of his car, and then it froze. Mm-hmm. So here he is carrying buckets of hot water out there and chiseling and trying to get his car to move again. I don't know. Every time we go on the bus run, we see him.
Well, now, would they plow the snow, or do they just let it pile up and pack it down?
Well, they had snow blowers you wouldn't believe. They could blow that snow a couple hundred feet. Got a picture of one of them too. But they would have to plow the runways. Those guys would take off in all kinds of weather, and they were so heavily loaded that they had to make it up all over these mountains at the end of the runway. So it was dangerous flying all the time. And I had some weather reports that show some of the bad conditions. And one of them said wind from here south by southeast, and then it said, you know, you could just tell the wind was within an hour it would come from somewhere else. And I don't know how there were so few casualties, but we still lost like 29 men altogether. And There was one plane crashed on the runway and set on fire. I had a couple pictures of that. And the next morning showing the pieces of wreckage laying there from the same angle. But one man got killed in that radar set, or something fell on him, and they couldn't get him out. And I saw the guys in the chow hall after that, and their jackets were, you know, burned on the outside, but they had insulation, and you could see the insulation sticking out, you know, just some kind of a fire protective shirt underneath it protected them. But they were all pretty rough looking, you know, as far as getting burns and stuff.
And did they lose naval ships as well, or men off of those ships?
Well, they lost a few ships, but there was a lot of torpedoing of ships, and a lot of convoys during World War II were protected by aircraft and submarines, detection gear, and everybody came to Newfoundland to last stop before you started across the Atlantic. So everybody was up there protecting the convoys. And
I was just kind of asking about the ships that were going in and out of that area in the time that you were up there. I mean, were there shipwrecks in the area, or the civilian ones, or things like that?
Well, one time there's a tower there where they're watching the harbor, you know, the harbor control people, and the ship ran into another one because the guys had the telescopes watching the girls or something, watching the girls' barracks or something, instead of watching these ships coming in. But the bay would freeze and blow out, freeze, thaw, and blow out all the pad ice and come back in and freeze again in one day. And I mean, it was rough. But when I was working in the post office, I got to go aboard all the ships and deliver mail. And whenever I carried registered mail, there might be paychecks in it, so I had to carry a 45 loaded. So, went aboard the Chattahoochee and the Caloosahatchee. They were icebreakers. I went aboard the Edisto. That was a supply ship. I went aboard the ARD-18. That was a auxiliary repair dock, and they could sink it in the water and run a couple tugboats in there and then raise it out and work on them. So it just had hollow, thin walls about 20 feet where all the crew was in. And then I got aboard a submarine once, and I couldn't get that mail pouch down the hatch. These guys had been running underwater for 40 days. 43 days, I think, and they were laying out on the deck just breathing air, which is a good thing, you know. And so they were on deck breathing air, and they invited me to lunch, and I got the mail pouch down. And when you go down the hatch, there's a space in there for a bunch of guys if they have to go down quick. They can all jump in there and spread themselves around the side while they go down the ladder to the next level. And that bag got caught in there, and I got it down through there, and they had a pull-down screen. They have a movie. They have lunch tables, but there's a guy sleeping right over a torpedo. Torpedo's about that big around, and they got their bunks laying right on them. Got a little tiny locker right alongside their bed. But they were a pretty happy bunch of guys just to see them.
Right. Now, as your enlistment ran out, did you have any thoughts of staying in the Navy or re-upping, or did you just figure, okay, you've put in your time, you're going to go home now?
Well, I wanted to go to college, so I had that set up pretty well when I got out. But they do have enlistment meetings and call you in and say you ought to re-enlist in that. And, you know, 20 years you got pension from them. That was a deal. You already got 2 of them down or 4 of them down with your reserve time. So it was tempting, but I still wanted to go to college. They offered me to work at, to go to nuclear energy school. They give you grades and stuff and all that. And what I didn't want to do is work in the office. So they gave me a test about working in the office, which was a yeoman. as a clerk, so they gave me a test, so I didn't want to work in the office. Every other one, all the way down. 86%.
Oh, well.
So I ended up being a YNT3, yeoman third class typist,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't type either. I had a rough time with that.
So that was like sort of the last stuff that you did, or was that when you went back to reserve
That's
status?
when I first got there. And,
Okay.
Got out of the post office work into the admiral, working right with the admiral. Admiral William Martin was the admiral I worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And I even had to write him a birthday song one time. He said, "Come in, write a song for the admiral." Oh yeah, ode to an admiral.
Right.
So I wrote that, and then another time they said, "Oh, there's a ship leaving, and they're making fun of us up here in Newfoundland. You better write something for that, and you better hurry, because in an hour they'll be out of radio distance." Oh man! So I wrote a poem about, "We're sorry to hear you must vamoose so quickly away from the land of the moose." But more or less, we're real men, and we can take this weather, and
Yeah.
you chickens have to leave. More or less in that order.
All right. Well, what sort of character was Admiral Martin?
He was kind of quiet, but he had his sword and stuff, and we left it in the office one day, and I took a picture of his sword laying there with his scabbard and his photograph, but he's kind of a quiet guy. But actually, he gave me a ride when I left the base. He gave me a ride to the airport, which was a couple of miles, and so he saw me going along, and he just stopped his car and gave me a ride. He was just for the men,
Right. Well, was there a lot of formality on the base? I mean, a lot of attention to the differences between the enlisted men and the officers and that kind of thing? Or were you a small enough group that you were pretty much just a team?
Well, they didn't let you get away with anything.
Mm.
One day they caught us stealing lockers. One guy needed another locker, so we went down to the other level where there wasn't any. They caught us going upstairs with that locker. And, of course, we needed extra coffee or something. We'd sneak it under our shirt and take it to our room. But there was supposed to be no food in the lockers, and all of formality of the barracks regulation. There's 2 pages of regulations on living in the barracks. You come from a home where your mother tells you to get them dirty socks in the laundry, and you go in the Navy and they got 2 pages of rules. It's really a shock, and you learn how to live. You learn how to get along with people, and you get in a few fights. I've had guys that just grab me around the neck, try to choke me to death, and so you learn how to handle your own battles and how to get along with people and who's nice and who ain't. And
All right. Is that, you think, maybe the main thing that you took out of that experience, or maybe in what ways did your time in the Navy affect you later on?
well, I think it was a good experience. You could judge people a little better. You could know what you could do on your own, because, I mean, you go in and you don't even know anything about airplane tickets or train tickets or reading a Navy order to go somewhere is enough, and going to different places, doing different things. But you get to see New York, like the Empire State Building, and Rockettes at the theater. You get to see in Washington, D.C., the house where President Lincoln died, and all of that. You get some real, for a small town guy, it's really an improvement over watching cows across the field,
All right. And then when you do get out, then did you go to college from there?
Yeah, I went right into college at the University of Detroit from there, and,
Okay.
And that was a shock too, because it was the other way. Yep.
There was nobody telling you what to do, and you were just kind of on your own?
Well, I was kind of on my own, away from home, and didn't have much money to get going, so I had saved up some money in the service, but when you spend 400 on books right away,
Well, did you have GI benefits or?
no, not at that time. It's, you know, I don't think.
And then did you finish college or?
Well, I got 2 years of college in, then I started working for Bendix as an electrical. Where I worked in the engineering lab, so as an engineering technician. So that was a lot of interesting times.
And then how long did you do that?
I worked for Bendix about 8 years, and then I moved on to up north here. That Bendix was down in St. Joe. I moved up north and in the Newego area, and then down to Sparta. So it's been a great experience being in the service, getting to know people, getting to travel around and see all these different places, and you didn't get paid much, but you had a lot of interesting times. Got a lot of nice photographs from it all.
Yeah, well, you certainly had some pretty distinctive experiences there, and not ones that most people will know much about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for taking the time to come in and talk to me today.
Thank you.
All right. And that basically does it for us. So.